welcome back to another episode of Sports Week. I'm your host, Spencer Ripchik.
And I'm your co-host, Tanyon Loose.
So, Tanyon, there's a kind of a big event this weekend, the blue and white game. Did you go? What did you think of it?
I was there in attendance, as you might be able to tell by my slightly red-colored skin here, along with the rest of the campus. It seems like almost everyone got sunburned on this warm-weathered weekend here. But I mean, I was pretty happy with the weather, the game. It was a nice experience to see football come back to Penn State once again and give some people some excitement heading into next year.
Yeah, I was there covering the team, but we have a very weird format, I would say.
Yeah.
That's all I would say. And I didn't get burnt because I was in the box with all the other people. So, yeah.
Yeah, the format was interesting. I mean, it made for some uneventful play at sometimes, other ones where people are clearly invested in certain players over other ones, and one of those guys got trotted out there.
Yeah.
You saw the crowd react, but I mean, other than that, it was what it was. Obviously, there's some depth problems there hurting them, but it was a cool scene.
Yeah. So sadly, this is our last episode of the semester, but we're going to finish it out strong. So like always, we're going to start this off with our favorite news. So Tanyon, why don't you get us started?
All right, so my favorite news is kind of a team we've actually talked a decent amount of recently. They've had quite the successful season, and that's softball. So they had their final game of their series against Rutgers, and one of their players kind of went off in the game. So they won that game 8-0, but you had Lila Krauthamel went 2 of 3 in the game with a triple and a grand slam. So that will be a total of 6 RBIs on the day for her. So I mean, it's pretty impressive stuff there. I think it's only been done like 8 times in the history of the program there. So it's obviously big news for them. They had a big win there. So now in 6th place in the conference, and they're playing 2 teams ahead of them on their schedule left. So they only have 3 series left in the year. So it's gonna be interesting to see where this team ends up. They're getting really down into crunch time here, and they have the opportunity to really vault up the standings with some big wins at the end of the season.
Yeah, that softball team is looking very, very new. They got some young girls on that team that look like they play pretty well as well. So yeah, they're a cool team to watch, especially since last season they did so bad, but this season looked like they turned it around.
Exactly.
Yeah, so my news came today. Penn State men's soccer added Michigan State transfer Olu Ongunwale. He played 4 seasons with the Spartans, starting in 8 of the 16 games in 2022 season. Now he joins a Penn State team that could definitely use some defensive help, as Penn State led up the second most goals in the Big Ten in 2021 with 25. So yeah, I mean, he's an older player with some experience, so he can help some of the younger guys on Jeff Cook's defense. So yeah, I think a little veteran guy coming in would be a big help for them.
Yeah, they're definitely going to need some help in the defense there. I'm pretty sure Brandon Hackenberg is no longer going to be a member of that program there. I think he's been here for, I don't even know how many years now.
Forever.
It seems like he's been here. I mean, he's not that much younger than his older brother, who we were talking about a little bit before we started off here. But yeah, he's been around the program for a while. They needed some defensive help. Went out and got in the transfer portal. As I've said multiple times recently, a recurring theme in college athletics now. Players joining other teams, and that's just the latest one to join Penn State. So, yeah.
Yeah, another team that could use some help, especially after their performance, Penn State men's volleyball. They lost in the conference tournament this weekend. So we're going to kind of give our reactions to that and see what's next for them pretty much.
I'm not sure if we want to take some of the blame here for a slight media jinx. I know I'm pretty sure I said I wouldn't be surprised if they had lost 1 set or less in the tournament. And well, they lost a lot more than that because they lost 3. And they ended up bowing out in the semifinals, and that ultimately cost them an NCAA qualifying spot, which is really a disappointing effort for this team. I think when you were so dominant for so long in the EIVA, and then to go out in the semifinals like that and just cost yourself the opportunity to compete for a national championship, I really can't even probably begin to imagine the mood around that team right now, just to have everything snatched away from you like that. But I mean, it's also part of their own doing. They didn't perform under pressure, and it's also, I mean, it's not really the fault of the team here because there is no Big Ten conference in volleyball, but when you play in a weaker conference like the EIVA relative to a lot of those conferences out west, you're going to run into problems like this where one loss can just totally derail your season in a snap of a finger, and that's exactly what happened to this team.
I feel like they should make a super conference like they were trying to do for football or other sports, because I feel like better competition, Penn State could actually have a chance at getting an at-large bid of playing with some of those other teams. I mean, yeah, this team was definitely a disappointment to the end of the season. I mean, they were killing it on a massive win streak, and then to lose it to Princeton, that was pretty bad. I mean, they also beat Princeton twice earlier in the year, so I mean, and they shut them out in one game, so they should have definitely beaten them. But yeah, and then, like you said, they didn't get an at-large bid for the NCAA tournament, which is a tough team because this team's had so much promise this year. But yeah, I mean, Princeton's Ben Harrington played really, really well.
Yeah, what do you have, 21
yeah,
kills?
21 kills.
Yeah.
He led both squads, so yeah, he kind of popped off, which was kind of different. I mean, some of the Penn State guys didn't really step up. They tried their best to carry the team, like Cal Fisher and all them, but couldn't do it.
It just looked like the start really, really was detrimental to this team. I mean, going down 2-0 like that is really, really tough for any team, and they battled back, and winning the third and fourth sets like that would almost lead you to believe, they're going to pull it off in the fifth set there for the tiebreaker. But Princeton also showed some real resiliency. When we were coming in, Penn State came in as the number 2 team in the nation, I think, and when you think you have them on the ropes, and then all of a sudden you're tied up 2-2, a lot of teams would probably crumble in that situation, and this Princeton team certainly did not do that. They got out to a lead in the fifth and ended up hanging on for the win there.
Yeah, I think something that is also disappointing is it was in Penn State's hometown of University Park, so they got to lose in front of their own fans, disappoint them, so it just added salt on the wound pretty much.
Yeah, it was certainly less than ideal circumstances for this team, and unfortunately, we kind of talked about like that West Coast road trip really a while back now. I mean, they had a couple losses strung in a row there out west, and we're like, oh, what's going to go on with this team? They started off the season strong, and then they rattled off a just absolutely humongous win streak. And we're like, all right, we can just totally ignore that West Coast trip. Doesn't matter at this point. They're going to go to NCAAs. They're going to compete with those same teams. But now they don't even have the opportunity to do that. And it's in part because of those early season losses. There was only 2 at-large spots, and they ended up not getting those, and that was in part because they lost to some of those teams out west earlier. Those 2 at-large spots went to Long Beach State and UCLA. They lost to UCLA. So that was obviously a big kind of factor, I think, in that decision-making there.
Yeah, I think it definitely took a toll on that team. But yeah, I feel like maybe it was kind of foreshadowing at the beginning of the season that they weren't going to get in just because they lost to those 2 out west teams.
Yeah. I mean, they had the win over Long Beach State, which you thought maybe could have pushed them to the front there, but I think Long Beach State also kind of in their own right played themselves in to the tournament there. I think they're actually the number 1 overall seed, I think. So, I mean, that clearly they got the resume to back it up, and that also comes back to the conferences like we talked about earlier there, but I just think it's kind of unavoidable for this team here. I know, like you said, like a super conference could be ideal, but I don't know if that would ever happen some sort unless Penn State really strings off 5-10 seasons of this level of dominance in a row in the EIVA. Maybe the athletic director, whoever that is going to be, going forward kind of tries to consider, like, all right, maybe we need to make some moves here to get this team in a more competitive conference. But, I mean, the fact that it's all the way on the West Coast, all those teams, really
it's very far.
Presents some logistical problems there. I don't know of any really scenarios where there's teams traveling that far to compete on a weekly basis.
Yeah, maybe they could, pick, a neutral site and have a bunch of games, but still that would be a lot of cost and a lot of money for our facility.
Problematic, of course.
Yeah. Oh, so this is our final episode of the semester, so we thought it would be a good idea to hand out some awards. So starting us off, we got our freshman of the year. Who do you think your freshman of the year is, Tanyon?
Yes, I do love me some awards too, so I'm quite excited about this. But I'm going to hop into my freshman of the year. That comes from the women's track team. That's Allison Johnson. So she was 3rd best in the nation in the indoor 800 this year, which is obviously pretty impressive stuff when you're able to come out and display that level of dominance in the 800 or any sport at all. So she was the only freshman inside the top 15 in the nation with her time of 2:02.84. So really, really impressive stuff from the youngster there in the women's track team. I think she dealt with little injury problems kind of towards the end of the season there. Hasn't competed in the spring, so it was an unfortunate end, but gotta kind of commend her for the early season efforts there, and I'm sure that this coaching staff is going to be looking forward to some future kind of hardware there.
Yeah,
going forward.
I kind of thought you were going to go with a track person, just out of luck.
Got a rep.
But she definitely sounds like she did a pretty good job this year. But my freshman of the year is men's hockey, Ryan Kerwin. I mean, this team was another team that wasn't great, but I mean, Ryan Kerwin was a star at a young age. He had 13 goals and 13 assists, and he was the 3rd leading scorer in points, and he was just behind Kevin Wall and Connor McEachern. So the future with the three of them looks pretty nice attack group going forward, pun intended.
Exactly, and I think that the team really had a lot of mixed expectations going into the year. No one really knew what this team was going to look like. They had some kind of older talent, but a lot of gaps to fill in there, and it was kind of questioning which young guys would step up, and he certainly did that, filled right into that role there, and going to be, like you said, a big part of this team going forward.
Yeah, Guy Godowski should be pretty happy with what he saw out of his three young guys this year. I mean, there's two of them aren't really too young, but I mean, they're pretty close.
Exactly. I think we're going to move on to our most improved player of the year this time. I'm going to hand it off to Spencer to go first so we can switch things up a little bit.
So we've talked a lot about this program, men's gymnastics, or we haven't talked too much. We talked more about Chase Klingman, who is my most improved player. I mean, he missed this season a couple seasons ago with injuries, but he finally got everything together in 2021 and 2022. I mean, he had a rough start to the season. Wasn't on a lot of people's radars, but I mean, he pulled it off, winning the pommel horse at the NCAA championships, which was the 12th for Penn State, and the 55th individual national title for Penn State as well.
Yeah, so my most improved player, it's the team we just talked about actually. It's Tozy Ezioni, who was on the men's volleyball team. We just lost, of course, in the semifinals there, so he's obviously probably not a happy camper right now, but I'm still going to commend him for his efforts all year long. It's really impressive stuff from him and the team in general. He wasn't really expected to be like a massive contributor on that team going into this year. I mean, they had two returning All-Americans in Fisher and Wildman, and I mean, but he really statistically was arguably the most important person on this team. He finished third in the team in points behind the two returning All-Americans, third in kills, but he was first in hitting percentage, hitting .528, which is just really impressive stuff, especially from a sophomore. So, I mean, that's nice from him right there. Led the team in blocks by a considerable margin, so he's really making his mark on both sides of the ball there, offense and defensively, getting blocks, getting kills. Really good stuff from him all around, and being just a sophomore, he's going to be potentially the hallmark of this team going forward, and if they can continue to display this level of dominance, I'm sure the recognition and accolades are going to start pouring in for a player of his caliber.
Yeah, hopefully he makes an impact soon, since this year was kind of a disappointment, like we said. But going into Team of the Year, I think we might have a consensus pick for both of us here. Let's hear what you got.
Yeah, I mean, as the resident wrestling reporter, I think I had no choice but to give the Team of the Year nod to the wrestling team. I mean, it was pretty dominant from them all around, winning the national championship, putting 5 individual champions up there. Really just, I mean, I think most people would probably be okay with agreeing that they're the best team on campus at this point, and probably will be for many years to come with the level that they're recruiting at, pulling in talent at, and just developing that talent at. Mm-hmm. So I think that it was pretty straightforward there. They're the best season out of anyone this year of any team, and could be a similar situation for many years to come.
Yeah, I also went with men's wrestling, but honorable mention to Penn State men's soccer. They won the Big Ten this year.
They did. I considered it. First.
They did choke in the NCAA tournament, so I didn't put it for them.
Not exactly the greatest.
No. So yeah, I picked wrestling. Obviously, like you said, and they had a ton of national champions. I mean, they lost in the Big Ten championship, but then they came right back and won the NCAAs, which is big, and it just solidifies that Penn State is the best wrestling school in the country.
Indeed. All right, moving on. Coach of the Year. What do you got there, Spencer?
So another team that we've talked about quite recently. I'm going to go with Carissa Crowell from the softball team. This team has really surprised me the most. I mean, last season they were 7-34, which was pretty terrible. But now this season they're on their way to a 30-win season, so they pretty much flipped it all the way around. And the place you look to go to make that change was the head coach. So yeah, I got to give it to Carissa Crowell. So he's really made this team competitive again in the Big Ten.
Yeah. I'm going to be a little bit of a homer here and give my Coach of the Year award to Cale Sanderson. I mean, he's just been integral to the success of this team, obviously. He constructed a beautiful roster for this team overall. He brought in transfers, one of them who won a national championship in Max Thiem, but Drew Hildebrand, obviously a big part of this team winning a lot of matches this year, as well as bringing back Brady Berge towards the end of the season, both of them kind of making it to NCAA's qualifiers, getting a couple points there for the team, which didn't really matter in the long run, but I mean, you never know how it could have played out. Those couple points could have made a big difference, but it's just the impact that you see him making on the wrestlers individually out there. He's always calm, composed. He obviously has his guys prepared well before the matches even go on. But even when you see him out there also warming up with his guys, the impact that he makes for this team is just, it's obvious, it's glaring, really, and the wrestlers will be the first ones to tell you that. And there's a reason why a lot of people want to come to Penn State to wrestle, and that's because of that man right there. And he just added another national championship to his resume.
Yeah, very well deserved for Coach of the Year. I was considering him as well, but I knew you might have to pick him for that, so I wanted to go away from that. Yeah, so now moving on to our final award, we have Player of the Year, and why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I kind of went back and forth through a couple things here. I think I considered I'll go with honorable mention here for McKenna Marissa, who's someone I definitely considered. She was really, really impressive for the women's basketball. This team this year is really one of the only reasons why they were as successful as they were, which, I mean, wasn't the greatest season for them. They were kind of middle of the pack in the Big Ten. But, I mean, she really could not have played much better throughout the season. There's a couple lulls and some performances there, but just really huge jump for her from last year to this one. And I think she has a chance to really bring in some accolades going forward in her college career. But I ended up giving my Player of the Year to women's soccer's Sam Coffey. I mean, obviously, the women's soccer team was very good this season, and she was arguably the biggest reason why they were that good. I mean, she was tied for the team lead in points, but it was really, I think, just the attention she was drawing all game long. People clearly were aware of her to start the game and had to worry about her all game long, and she was just a big part of one of the best teams on campus this season. And I mean, everyone knew she was going to be a big part of that coming in, and she delivered for the most part, I think.
Yeah, I covered the women's soccer team earlier this fall. Yeah, she was definitely a big part to that. And I think the other thing was she's a very big leader for all the younger people on the team.
Exactly.
So now moving on to my Player of the Year, I'm going to go with women's hockey's Natalie Heising. I mean, she was just the most dominant player in the CHA conference this season. She had 20 goals, 20 assists, 20 on both sides, so she wasn't very selfish. She also had the assists. And she was also, like I said earlier with Ryan Kerwin, he was also not on a great team as they lost in the first round. But, I mean, could be her last season at Penn State, and she's really paved the way for this team going forward. And I think the younger people on the team could look up to her as well and try to follow in her footsteps.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a warranted award right there. This team may have not ended the season as they wanted to, but really one of the biggest reason why they were even in the position they were kind of towards the end of the conference slate there was because of Natalie Heising, and she really performed all season long. So I think it was definitely deserving there.
Yeah, so that wraps up our awards, and it wraps up this podcast. And this is our last podcast of the semester of Sports Speak.
So yeah, it's going to be a tough farewell to all of our viewers and my fellow co-host here. It's been a joy to film this all year long, really. I've had some fun doing this with you.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun this year. It was definitely something different that I never experienced before, but it was good to learn how to talk on camera and all that.
Exactly. So
thank you.
Aside from that, that's about all we have. So
thank you, and have a good rest of your week.